Good afternoon. Happy Friday, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jen Jordan. I lead content and thought leadership at Insight Partners. I also organize the Scale Up AI conference coming up shortly on November 12th, which features keynotes from Ellie K. Miller and Andrew Ng. As a preview to this amazing Scale Up AI event, I'm so thrilled today to introduce this fireside discussion with Dell Technologies Global Alliances CTO for AI and Data Management, Rob Shear. Rachel, Weston, Rowell, and Ellie Potter are here from Insight Partners to have a fireside discussion with him today. During our session, we're pleased to offer you 35% off a virtual ticket for Scale Up. The code and the website will appear right here on screen during the chat. With that, please welcome our speakers to the stage. Over to you, Rachel and Ellie.
Hello, everyone. Very nice to be here with you today. Welcome to Scale Up AI Sound Bites. This is an engaging series of AI-centric LinkedIn Live sessions featuring prominent leaders from Insight Partners ecosystem that are helping shape the future of AI. These talks set the stage for Scale Up AI, as Jen mentioned, one of the first global conferences that brings together the top AI builders, executives, luminaries, and innovators. Insight Partners is just thrilled that Dell is a Scale Up AI partner this year and that Ellie and I have the opportunity to interview Rob Shear. Rob, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you for having me today. So I am Rob Shear, and I'm the Global Alliances CTO for AI and Data Management. I've been with Dell for 18 years now, coming from the EMC acquisition, and I work with our Global Alliance partners to help them, bring generative AI use cases to life.
Wonderful. Well, let us jump in. So as we all know, there's no shortage of excitement and hype when it comes to AI. Where do you see businesses adopting AI and what challenges are they facing?
Yeah. So, I think I always like to start out saying, most companies are still struggling to get a lot of value out of Gen AI, right? I work with a lot of different companies, and there are a handful who are basically crushing it. They're doing all the right things. They're seeing huge returns. I work with a large electronics company, and they created their own LLM. They do all their printed circuit boards automatically now, right? So something that used to be a human process that would take up to 12 months is now being done in less than 2 weeks with like a human basically not in the loop anymore. And that's giving them a huge competitive advantage against their competitors because they can, create new products more quickly. But for the most part, enterprises are still in the beginning stages, right? They're doing POCs, 65% or maybe using one use case, two use cases. But as you get broader, it gets down to very, very few companies. And most of them, 70%, I think is the number we talk about at Dell, are still struggling to get true value from their AI deployments. And I see that all the time. And one of the challenges with that is that a lot of employees are now kind of like going it alone, right? So while they wait for central IT or the business to come up with these use cases, they're just going out to Chat GPT, and unfortunately, they're putting a lot of confidential data into these public systems, and that leads to risk for the business, right? So that's a big challenge we see. And most companies are really not doing effective training. Like I know inside of Dell, we all went through security training, we all went through generative AI training, and there was a whole big push around being very cautious about what you're using, only using it in prescribed areas. But most companies are not doing that yet, right? So that's another big risk. And as we look at why are they having these challenges, there's really kind of three big things. One is just the staff, right? If you're I work with like an insurance company, right? And you would think insurance companies, they've been doing, they have all kinds of data people, right? They've been doing this for forever to make sure they're like, they're charging you the right insurance, actuarial tables, but when you get into this generative space, right, in this new space, they don't necessarily have the people on staff, right, to do this. And you can't necessarily just snap your fingers and have a whole bunch of PhDs, data scientists show up in your organization or in the world, right? I mean, that's, we can't, they have to go through university and they've got to get out. So they have to decide: do they try and hire people? Do they bring in outside consultants? So staff is one. Um, Concerns around security of their data is another big inhibitor, right? Everybody, like I was saying before, you're worried about your data getting sucked into the public models. So you want to make sure you're doing it in a way that keeps it private. And then people worry about the cost, right? Do I invest now? Do I invest later? How much do I invest now? I mean, a lot of these things, I think, like not stymie enterprises, but to slow down that adoption rate, because nobody wants to nobody wants to spend a lot of money and make the wrong decision, right? So that those are the big challenges that I see, out there today.
Yeah, that really resonates with us because we see that across the board as well. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about how Dell is helping customers overcome these challenges.
Yeah, so Dell's approach, because we solve these challenges firsthand, because obviously we're, in most large enterprises and mid-sized enterprises use Dell today. And it feels like so long ago, but it was just back in March, at GTC, like not six months ago now or something like that, right? We released the Dell AI Factory, right? And that was our approach to try and come up with a standardized way for companies to deploy AI in their environments, right? And just like physical factories produce washing machines and what have you, tires and things like that. The Dell AI Factory, and we released one with NVIDIA, obviously at GTC, produces business outcomes, because that's what people want, right? When you go to a business, they're saying, well, why am I going to do this? Like, what's that business value you're going to release? So when I'm working with customers, that's always the first conversation, is like, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? Dell is a great platform company, and like I said, I like to care about the platform. I'm sure Michael Dell cares a lot about the platform. Everybody else cares about the business outcome, right? So we want to make sure we're leading with that. And then the next big piece of the factory is, how do we handle the data? Like, what's the fuel for the factory, right? And in this case, the corporate data, the corporate IP, that's what's fueling the factory. And in most companies, it's scattered around the enterprise, right? Different business units have their data. Some of it's on-prem, some of it's in the cloud. I work with a lot of manufacturing companies, and they have data at the edge in every plant. Hospitals have data all over the place, right? So those data is coming from everywhere. So once we solve the data problem, which is an interesting challenge, we want to make sure we're hitting head on in the beginning. Obviously, Dell comes in. We have servers, we have storage, we have data protection, we have network to make all that work. And then we partner very closely with NVIDIA as well as the other silicon manufacturers. But typically with the Dell AI Factory with NVIDIA, we'll use the NVAIE stack, right? Their AI enterprise stack, which brings a lot of software to bear. But then there's a ton of ISV work in this space, right? There's a lot. I mean, the amount of innovation happening, like, reminds me back to, like, the dot-com era, which, where there was, I've been doing this too long, maybe, right? Where you saw, huge innovation happening, and the amount of excitement that's going on. I mean, I honestly, as a technologist, I love it. I mean, just to see how the world has shifted so quickly, right? And with so much excitement. And look, and some stuff's going to work, and there are going to be winners and losers, as in any software deployment. But there's a lot of that. And then there's a big services play, right? So Dell has a certain amount of services to make this all go together. I also work with our alliance partners, who bring a lot of services to bear. So that's our approach. The Dell AI Factory, with NVIDIA, or it could be with AMD or Intel, is how we approach the market to try and make it more repeatable for companies to get to value faster.
Yeah, I think the excitement plus very large opportunity space plus like really wanting to focus on business outcomes actually becomes a little bit of a stumbling block for some of the companies we work with. They kind of struggle with, like, well, where do we start? And they might be stymied by too many use cases. So how do you approach that challenge?
Yeah, I mean, that is for sure one of the biggest inhibitors, right? So it's one of two things. Either, well, so the main thing is, like, really, it's too many, right? So the typical business, when they start looking at this, look at over 200 use cases. I know when Dell looked at this last year, they surveyed the employees, and we came up with 2,500 use cases, which, is madness. I mean, it's madness, right? I've worked companies have 900 use cases. So what we like to do at Dell is, we do no cost half-day workshops with our customers, right? We sit down and we have kind of a standardized workshop. We go through and we kind of look at it on two axes, right? So one is, how is it adding business value, right? Is it helping you make more of your product? Is it helping make it better, like improve quality control? Is it helping make it less expensive, or can you make it faster, right? So what's that business value? Because once again, if you're not coming out with a good business value, the CFO is never going to sign off on this, right? So you gotta start out that gate. So how is it helping the business? And then we take that against the x-axis, right, which is, do you have the data you need, right, to do what you want to do? Is there an AI model that already exists, right? That's obviously a lot easier if you can use an off-the-shelf model versus having to train your own model. Do you have the processes in place? Like, one of the big challenges we see, especially for more established companies, is there's a lot of terrible processes that just happen in companies, right? And if all you do is apply AI to a bad process, you're just going to get a bad process that happens more quickly, right? So the human factor in there is, say, can we improve this process? Can we not just make it go faster, but make it better at the same time is important. And then, do I have the people I need? And do I have the platform? So when you build that kind of axis out in the upper right hand side, you'll see very quickly some are going to come out, because what happens once again in the real world is that there's thousands of POCs stuck. Right, I work with companies all the time, and I know NVIDIA works with companies all the time, where there's thousands of these POCs spun up because people didn't take the time in the beginning to prove out, like, how do I know I won, right? Like if you can't make another widget, or you can't make it better, or you can't improve engagement, or whatever you're trying to do, increase sales, reduce theft. I mean, it depends. Every industry has their own needs. It's just not worth it, right? So that is how we approach it out of the gate. And when you do that, honestly, I've been much more successful with companies, because you could pick one, and then you pick another one, and then you just one at a time, and eventually do that. And typically, we also like to start with internally focused use cases, right? There's we have chat.dell.com, right? So if that gives me, as a Dell employee, the wrong answer, I mean, I'm sad, right? But it's not like a CNN moment, right? I mean, nobody wants the Air Canada model where the chatbot made up a bereavement flight policy that got a lot of press, and honestly, I think made everybody very nervous. So I am working at most companies I do work with. They start internally with their own employees, where, once again, the risk is significantly lower. And then as they get more comfortable, the use cases for the externally facing ones, usually come next.
Yeah.
Yeah, with this many stuck POCs, which is something that we see a lot, and a lot of challenging trying to figure out how to articulate business value. One of the biggest questions we get is, how do you advise customers on choosing cloud versus on-prem?
Yeah, and we get that a lot too, right? So obviously, Dell, we're a platform company, so we love the on-prem, right? But realistically, there's a lot of reasons to start in the cloud, right, and to do things in the cloud. I mean, one of the biggest advantages to the cloud is speed and flexibility, and that's in general, right? I mean, when you're doing deployments, right, you can spin something up, you can spin it down, you pay as you go. So from that standpoint, it's good. But one of the things I always like to recommend when people start in the cloud is that they try and avoid using cloud-specific API calls, right? Because if you go to AWS and you use all of their cloud calls, all their Gen AI calls, and then you're like, you know what, we want to move this to Azure, right? We want to move it on-prem. We want to move it to GCP. Like, that move now becomes much more complicated. You can run the NVIDIA stack in the cloud, right? You can run standard deployments in the cloud. So that way, if down the road you want to move it on-prem, or once again, move it between clouds, you get that flexibility. So, but when I'm talking to customers, usually we're taking a look at, hey, where is the data today, right? If you have a lot of your data on-prem, at the edge, in certain locations, our whole approach is to bring AI to your data, right? So if you're an established company and you have data centers, or you have your data privately held, it is easier to work right there, right? So we take a look at that. We take a look at your security concerns, right? Are you using, how secure is the data? I work once again with a lot of healthcare companies where HIPAA and privacy is like, at the concerns of privacy at the highest levels. And then once again, they want to keep things private. I work with a lot of companies that do regulatory filings, right? And all the source data for those regulatory filings are private. Obviously, the file itself is public, but so they want to keep that private in a private setting. How customized do you want it? Like, when you go to the cloud, typically you're kind of forced into certain boxes, right? Which might work fine for your business, right? And that's great, right? But if it doesn't, once again, keeping it on-prem. And the last one really comes down to cost, right? Where, like I said, it's very easy to do, POCs and small scale in the cloud. But as you get to larger scale, paying per token, can get very expensive, very quickly. For sure. And often, one of the things you can do if you're looking to start on-prem is, you know, not everybody has to spend, millions of dollars to start on-prem if you want to start there, right? You can start with a single workstation. We have a lot of companies I work with where they buy like our high-end precision workstations, we put GPUs in them, and they give them to data scientists. You could start with a single server. I mean, you'd be amazed how much you can do for a startup or a small company with like a single server, which you buy one time and then you can use 24 hours a day, right? You don't have to worry about any cost. It's a fixed cost. It's locked into your environment. These lower end servers don't need the kind of power requirements that you need as you get to scale, right? So I see a lot of companies do that as well because generally it's about a year return, right? Versus the cloud is, more or less as you look at it, on-prem versus the cloud from a cost standpoint. So that's how we tend to approach that space.
So I think that there's so many decisions for somebody to make on this path, right? Which use cases, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? And I think this question of cloud on-prem is another one of those questions. And so do you have any advice or guidance for people that might help them in the on-prem cloud deployment questions, or like what's the tipping point to help make this choice?
Yeah, and like I said, it's a tricky problem, right? Because every company's different, right? We totally get that, right? But there was an ESG study released earlier this year, and that compared the cost of inferencing in the cloud versus inferencing on-prem. And if you look at inferencing with like retrieval augmented generation, as we look forward, that's the bulk of the work, right? There's a lot of money being spent by a small number of companies to do training today, right? And that's probably 90% of the spend. But as we look forward, for I'm going to say for regular companies doing this work, inferencing is really where the workload is, right? So this ESG study compared inferencing in the cloud versus on-prem, and it was 4 to 8 times less expensive to run it on-prem, right? So once again, as we look at it, I love the cloud for the speed and the flexibility, but as I want to go into production and I want to go at scale, like I just don't want to have that ongoing cost that's unfixed, right? Where if you purchase the hardware and you have it in your data center or in a colo, it just puts you in a known spot, right? Because you can spiral out of control very quickly in the cloud. And there's a number of companies I've worked with who started in the cloud and then their bills were $80, $90, $100,000 a month, and now they're like, and these are not humongous companies, right? Where very quickly as it's taken off, they've realized that like their budgets are just being just blowing up really quickly. So we're either looking to bring on PAN or looking to bring on prem or looking at some of our GPU as a service providers. So there's a number of methods, but typically it does come down to like in the long run, it's going to be less expensive to run it on-prem, for sure. At least the steady state workloads, and then you can keep doing your POCs and your testing and things you want to try around, or maybe you're getting something as a SaaS offering. I mean, I think that's another big thing we're seeing already, right? Where there's a lot of, just like we have Salesforce.com and ServiceNow, and they're all adding generative AI workloads, and there's going to be a lot of other SaaS providers too that I'm sure are going to be also great use cases.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that one of the challenges is getting the CFO to sign off. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the personas, the typical personas that you work with, and how do you help them with their business outcomes?
Yeah, so one of the things we like when we're talking to the Dell Salesforce, we like to say is like if you're talking to the director of IT or the CIO, you're probably talking to the wrong person, right? In the account. Now, not to say you don't need to be talking to that person, because obviously from the Dell standpoint, we typically have a fantastic relationship with the IT staff because that's our sweet spot. We've done that forever. But you can't just do that, right? You've got to be able to go to the line of business, right? The chief marketing officer, the chief revenue officer, the lines of business, because those are the ones who have the actual business challenge. Now, in a lot of companies, they may be the same team or they may not, right? So if they're not the same team, a lot of what we try and do is make sure we're bringing them together, right? Saying, hey, because the IT staff is probably going to run this regardless of who's ultimately deciding to get it, right? If it's somebody in the chief marketing department, or they want to do customize emails and customize reach out or videos, right? They know what they want. They probably don't know what it's going to take to run it, right? But they're the ones who, when we go back to that business value discussion, they see the business value. If I could create customized videos, right, for each single customer. And I work with a company that does this, right? They create customized marketing for every single email that goes out, for every single touch point. When you're inviting somebody to show up to an event, you can get a customized message to that person. That garners a lot, right? So you could draw that business value from that use case, and then the IT department ultimately has to actually deploy it and run it on behalf of the business. So it is kind of an all hands on deck. And like I said, we push really hard inside of our training inside of Dell is to say, make sure you're getting to the right people in the account. And they're probably people you're not as familiar with just because of the nature of our business. And a lot of people are in that same spot, right? They're very siloed in. But the more you can bring people together, I mean, we do it all the time where it's like they're in the same company, but they actually don't know each other. I'm amazed how many times people they meet for the first time because I'm bringing them together to say, hey, like we need some hardware. We're going to need to deploy this in your data centers. And by the way, this is the business value we're trying to get out of it, right? So,
love an opportunity to build bridges and create collaboration inside of companies. So.
Exactly.
Well, Rob, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for being here, sharing all of your experience and wisdom. I think people are going to walk away with some better tools to make decisions for their own businesses, which I think is hugely helpful. To everybody in the audience, we hope to see you on November 12th at Scale Up AI. Ellie and I have had a great time, Rob.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was great having this conversation, and hopefully everybody will show up at the conference.
Yes, it's going to be amazing.
And use that Dell VIP code, apparently. So.
That's right there.